What's up, folks? It is Thursday. This is Why Wait Till Sunday, and I'm your host, Alfred. After the Gators clinched this week, I've got my SEC championship hoodie on from 2006. One of the last times we actually had an offense that was exciting as this year, so I'm celebrating that. Excited to see them go back to Atlanta. But getting into the slate, I know that's what everyone is here for. We have an interesting one on tap, and the matchups are UGA at Missouri, Oklahoma at West Virginia, Rutgers at Maryland, Wake at Louisville, Bama at Arkansas, Navy at Army, classic game there. Coastal Carolina back on the slate against Troy, UNC at Miami, Wisconsin at Iowa, Michigan State at Penn State, Houston at Memphis, Washington at Oregon, and finally a late ad, Duke at FSU. Tune in for that one. So we'll do the rundown like we always do. We're going to look at the team totals, based on the implied total here. We've got Alabama by far and away the most fantasy-friendly offense in any week, really, but especially this week, projected for 50 points. No one else is even within 10 points of that. The next team comes in tied. We've got Miami projected for 35 and Oklahoma projected for 35. And then we drop below that 5-touchdown mark. Maryland, interestingly enough, comes in and the fourth highest team total with 33. Georgia is at 33. Louisville is at 33. Houston, 32. Coastal Carolina, 32. UNC, 32. FSU, interestingly, 31. Wake Forest, 31. Penn State, 31. Memphis, 30. And Oregon, 29. And that's about the top half of your projected team totals. Those are all the teams projected to go over roughly 4 touchdowns. So we're definitely going to focus in on that, but I will tell you there are a couple other teams we will keep an eye on for some extreme value. And getting right into the players then, and we'll talk about the matchups as we go through the players. As always, we're going to go through the expensive guys kind of name by name and then get a little bit more selective as we go down the list into the value plays to highlight. And leading off the quarterback group is, of course, Mac Jones. He's having a year for the ages, up there with Joe Burrow from last year, up there with Kyle Trask from this year. I mean, all these guys are just tearing up defenses. Mac Jones, definitely a threat for, 405 touchdowns, of course. Or some more, more could go to Najee Harris or Brian Robinson. We don't really know. These blowouts, we've talked about this before. They can be a bit unpredictable, but I think he's a very safe bet for 303. Almost lock and load. The question is, can you get that or a little more from a guy who might be a little less of a salary? But Mac Jones, you partly are paying for the fact that he's almost certainly not going for less than 303 touchdowns. De'Ara King, 9,300, second most expensive quarterback on the slate. And the matchup is good against UNC. I mean, certainly you can, turn a profit taking quarterbacks and other teams against UNC, partly because their defense is not very good. And the other part is, offenses know they've got to score. Last week we talked about, Notre Dame keeping the pedal to the metal, even though they controlled the game against UNC. You never feel comfortable with, even a 17-point lead against UNC. So teams know they've got to keep scoring. I will say, he's had some clunkers. He certainly has a ceiling at a 54-point game. Last time against Duke, he had a 32-point game. Otherwise, though, the guy did not top 30 points before the big blow-up against NC State, and then he barely covered 32 against Duke last week. The matchup's good. I think he's risky for that extreme price tag of 9,300. So I think we can find a guy we can feel pretty comfortable who can get or challenge 30 points without paying 9,300. Spencer Rattler, of course, a great player from Oklahoma, and they get West Virginia, which is a terrible matchup. Although, I have seen teams put some points up against them, but just to give you an idea, West Virginia is bottom of the slate in general in terms of allowing volume. So only 27 pass attempts allowed per game, only 34 rush attempts per game. That is bottom third on the slate. And then you've got a 4.8 yards per play allowed. That is bottom 3 on the slate. So that defense is pretty nasty. And the biggest, more concerning, honestly, than per play stuff is just the volume. Teams do not get a chance to run a lot of plays against them, partly because they run the ball a lot on offense and they play a slow brand of football. And I don't love it. And, Rattler has a kind of disappointing floor. The guy, in the last 5 games, he's only topped 30 points one time. That was against Oklahoma State. 13.5 against Baylor, 21 against Texas Tech, which is mind-blowing because Texas Tech is horrible. 17 against Kansas, which could be excused because that was a blowout and they didn't need to throw the ball. Keep that aggression. The offense, I want games where the offense has to be aggressive. Started off the season much better, but certainly is trending down. I'm not sure $9,000 is really the right price point for him. Cunningham, 8,900. I'm old enough to remember when he was, 7,400 earlier in the season, but he certainly has proved himself, popping over 35 points, 3 of the last 4 games, and over 30 the game before that. He's cleared 30 points 4 of the last 5 games at 8,900. The matchup is pretty good against Wake Forest, who is not a scary defense to play against. Wow, they're giving up the 4th most pass attempts on the slate at a yards per attempt of a nice 7.5. They're giving up 39 rush attempts per game. That's about middle of the slate, high middle, and 4.6 yards per carry. So that's certainly nice. And overall, 6.1 yards per play, which is top, 3 on the slate in terms of giving it up. So Wake Forest is a good matchup. And when you're talking about Rattler or Cunningham, I know it's only $100 savings. Why are you going to do Rattler in a bad matchup who, hasn't been impressing versus Cunningham, who's the exact opposite, been impressing of late, and the matchup is even better. And he's been doing it on the ground. 3 of the last 4 games, he has gone over 100 yards on the ground, 197 and then 133 in back-to-back weeks. Not quite getting to 300 yards passing, but he's just been really showing some rushing ability that wasn't quite there before him. He was the kind of guy that was going for, 30 to 40 yards, and all of a sudden he's just turned it on, which is very interesting and exciting for fantasy. Tutu Atwell has declared himself eligible for the NFL draft, so he will not be in play for Cunningham. He was his top target, so that's, maybe a little bit concerning, but he'd really been a little bit in and out. Recently, he missed the game completely, and then also was just kind of not the same guy for like the last 3 or 4 weeks, as some other guys have stepped up, and then Cunningham obviously just taking off on the ground and being a madman there. So certainly he is interesting. 8,900, a guy who's probably going to get you 30 points. Then you have Sam Howell. Of course, he is a great player and gets Miami, which is a tough defense in general. On this slate, Miami ranks, bottom of the barrel in terms of pass yards per attempt, bottom of the barrel in terms of rush attempts against, and, low middle in terms of yards per attempt on the ground. So in general, they're a tough defense. And then their average yards per play is only 5.1. So certainly not a fun matchup for Sam Howell, although, that UNC offense I'm not too worried about, just because they're, it's comprised of a bunch of really good players and they're going to put up points. I think Miami's defense is pretty good, but it's not the Notre Dame defense that really gave UNC a bunch of trouble. At 8,800, I think I said 8,900 before, it's probably not an optimal number for him. There's some guys I think, could certainly match his output at a lot less. Brady White from Memphis is 8,600 against Houston. That's a fine matchup. Interestingly, Houston only allows 30 pass attempts per game so far in the slate. Fine yards per pass attempt, that's not a problem. They're a little more susceptible to the run. I think Memphis will be fine. 8,600 for a guy who's not going to run at all. Don't love that either. So we're going to keep going down. Tyler Show is very interesting for Oregon. He does get you some on the ground, 40 to 50 yards against Washington, who is not a fun defense. Very low volume against Washington. Only 29 pass attempts allowed. That's real ugly. Only 35 rush attempts allowed. Only 64 plays run against them. I mean, contrast that to, even some of these other teams like 75 yards or 75 plays run against per game for like Wake Forest. So you're going to take, 10 plays that could matter. That's not an insignificant number just in terms of volume. I want offenses that are going to get a chance to get out there and run a lot of plays, especially if I'm going to pay, in the 8s or more. So I don't love the matchup against Washington. Grayson McCall gets Troy. He's the quarterback for Coastal Carolina, who's just having an absolute Cinderella season. Just beat BYU last week. Looked pretty good doing it. The Troy defense is certainly not concerning, but they're also not a complete pushover. About middle of the road in terms of all the things I'm looking at. Attempts allowed, rush attempts allowed, yards per pass attempt. It's just kind of middle. So, certainly not someone to be like, oh, I'm not going to play him. For 8,300, that's not a bad number, to be honest with you, because McCall is going to give you 40, 50 yards on the ground. He's kind of the engine of that offense along with CJ Marable, the running back. But McCall almost splits that backfield, and he runs a lot. That's actually a pretty nice number, I think, for a guy who gives you the dual threat and is probably going to be responsible for most of the TDs that the team scores. Their team total is 32. So they should get to at least 4 touchdowns. Of course, they could go over that, get to 5. I would imagine, he's going to get responsible for 3 touchdowns. Hopefully one of them is a rushing touchdown. And then I think he can pay off that 8,300 price tag. You got to hope that Troy keeps that game competitive, which I'm a little nervous about. Coastal Carolina is a 13, 14-point favorite. And, they don't seem to have anything very special on offense. And Coastal Carolina is a pretty good defense, gave Zach Wilson a potential top 10 NFL quarterback pick, fits. They're a good team. Even though their name is Coastal Carolina, and I guarantee you a lot of people haven't really heard of them before this year, they are a quality football team. I think they're going to give Troy a lot of trouble, control that game, and my concern would be Grayson McCall, squeaks in, with a good day of 300 yards, but not a peak ceiling day, where he just has to go crazy. Same thing's going to be with JT Daniels. And Georgia against Missouri. I mean, Missouri is just real bad. Georgia's a 14-point favorite. Yeah, they're projected to score 33 points. Interestingly, Missouri is another team here where they don't allow a lot of volume, only 30 pass attempts per game, 35 rush attempts per game. Only 66 plays run against that defense per game. And Georgia's not going to try to run a lot of plays anyway. They're probably very happy to run as few plays as possible and get out of the stadium. And they want to run the ball. So, they're going to split it between Zamir White and James Cook and Kendall Milton if he's healthy, Kenny McIntosh. I mean, it's just not an offensive smorgasbord at all that we want, especially when we're paying 8,200. So, pass on JT Daniels for me. Okay, now we got one of the first guys I am very excited about. Performance and price, it's all there. Clayton Tune for Houston comes in at 7,800. Houston is scheduled to score 32 points. They are a slight favorite against Memphis in what probably is going to be a shootout type game. You like to see that. 62-point total. In a perfect world, you have a scenario where you could go to overtime, and then that's just an absolute jackpot. But Memphis is bad, 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 bad against the pass. They allow 38 pass attempts per game, which is it's tied for second most on the slate, 8 yards per attempt, third most on the slate. And actually, it's not that, running the ball on them is less efficient. You can throw all day on Memphis. They seem to have a fairly reasonable running defense, only allowing 3.9 yards per carry. Certainly a pass funnel when you look at it like that. I mean, you can throw all day on them, and running the ball is a little less, rewarding. I really like Clayton Tune. Man, I mean, 7,800. This is the kind of value to me where, I mean, he could challenge, Malik Cunningham type numbers. He could challenge Spencer Rattler type numbers. Hell, he could challenge Derek King type numbers, who comes in at 9,300. In this matchup especially. But the nicest thing about Clayton Tune is he's going to also give you some stuff on the ground, which is, really what you have to hit that true ceiling. 300 yards passing is nice, but you want a guy who can chip in 40 on the ground, maybe get a rushing touchdown. And Tune can certainly do that. So, in his last, just this season, he's got 4 games where he's had over double-digit carries and, routinely chipping in 30 yards. Last game against South Florida, he was 10 for 120 on the ground. He's also run it in 4 times, for that nice rushing touchdown bump. And then on the, through the air, he's had 300 yards the first 3 games of the season, and then, has backed off a little bit since then. 263, 189, and 165 in the last 3 weeks. But one of those games was against Cincinnati, which we will just excuse because they have one of the, best defenses in the NCAA. A little disappointing against Central Florida, actually, which should have been kind of a shootout. He only had 263, won 2 picks. 37 on the ground. That wasn't a great day. South Florida just completely eviscerated. 165 through the air, but 3 touchdowns. And again, the 120 on the ground with 2 touchdowns. I mean, that was a slam dunk there. He's been real good. He's hit the bonus in 4 out of his 6 games. And then of the 2, he did not hit either rushing or passing bonus. One was against one of the better defenses in the country in Cincinnati. And I don't really know what happened with Central Florida. It was really one of his just worst days of the season. Only completed 50% of his passes. Obviously just was a bad game. I'm not sure exactly what went on there. But man, for 7,800, a guy who can do both on the ground, through the air, the matchup is great. Memphis stinks, and at least on defense, I like it. I like it a lot. 7,800, that's going to be a prime play for me this week. I may not even mess around with these top quarterbacks above him. I mean, I think if you roll out a lot of tournament lineups, you've got to find a way to fit Mac Jones, Mac Jones, Devonta Smith stack somehow, and we'll get to him. But that's going to be brutal on the rest of your team. I think you should probably try, especially in some tournaments. But, for cash games, for the majority of my teams, it's going to be some of these lower quarterbacks that I think can have spike weeks. And one of those is, again, Clayton Tune. Next, we have little Tua. That's Tagovailoa, and he is 7,100. He's the Maryland quarterback going up against Rutgers, who is, just terrible on defense and allowing 33 points per game. You can kind of do whatever you want against them. They're very soft on the ground. They're not one of these that are the top of the the top of the list here in terms of exploitable, but just generally they're not good. I mean, they're definitely in the worst third of the defenses on this slate. A little bit of a trend towards, passing on them. And I like this matchup. I think Maryland, is going to come out here and want to make a statement, want to finish the season strong. Loxley, their coach, is building something there. He's recruiting well. I just think this team has some momentum. And I kind of like Tagovailoa in this matchup, especially. I mean, at only 7,100 now, Maryland has had a rocky season, especially with the COVID stuff. They haven't played a lot of games. And so his stat lines this year, are Northwestern, who's a really brutal defense. He was, really bad. 56% completion, 3 picks, no touchdowns, just gross. But then against Minnesota, went off 394 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick, 8 for 64, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. I mean, that was incredible. But we know Minnesota has a terrible defense. Against Penn State, who's got a pretty bad middle defense. 282, 3 touchdowns, 7 for 13 on the ground. And then against Indiana, I played a lot of this guy and very disappointing outing. Only 241, under 50% completion percentage, 1 touchdown, 3 picks. But, I've come to really respect that Indiana defense. I thought they were primarily an offensive ball club, but that defense has been pretty darn good for most of the season. They gave it up to Ohio State, but, everybody does there. I think this is a matchup that, he can be real nice for us. 3 touchdowns, absolutely in play. Challenge for 300 yards. I don't know if I can guarantee that. Obviously, he's only done it once this year, but for 7,100, you probably don't have to have 300 if you get 3 touchdowns. It's really not a bad play. And the matchup is real good against Rutgers, and he can chip in on the ground too. I like that play a pretty good amount, especially considering, some of the quarterbacks this week are just brutal. Jordan Travis for FSU at $7,000. I think Lil Tua has a much better ceiling. I mean, Travis ain't going to throw for 250 yards. He may rush for 100. He's done it one time this year. But that offense at FSU is just dreadful. Travis, he's just not good enough for $7,000. I mean, I would want him to be less than that. I think his floor is brutally low. Even though they're playing Duke, who's just trashy. I don't think I feel comfortable with Travis. The passing is just not really there. He can run maybe for 100, but I think 150 max in the passing game. The ceiling is just lower than Tagovailoa. We've got Sam Hartman for Wake Forest at 6,800. And last time we saw him, he was going absolutely bonkers against North Carolina. He was a GPP winner that week. He was in the $5,000 price range and went for like 40 points or something. He had 5 total touchdowns. It was absolutely insane. This matchup is pretty good. Wake Forest against Louisville. And Louisville's defense is not too intimidating, but they do seem to limit plays run against, only 63. And most concerning is only 24 pass attempts allowed per game. Teams seem to run if they do anything on the Louisville defense. And that concerns me a little bit for his potential upside at 6,800. Sean Clifford at 6,400 for Penn State. They get Michigan State, who is very bad on defense. But I have not, they're kind of playing some quarterback roulette. They've got Will Levis in there. I think the leash is very short for either one. If they start playing bad, they're going to pull them. And Michigan State defense is not scary at all, but I think I'd rather play, maybe some of the weapons in that game, not the quarterback, since that seems to be something that can change mid-game, and I don't want to put any investment into that. Oh, let's see. We're going to skip through some of these cheaper guys. And come to Noah Vedral for Rutgers. He is only 5,400. And the reason he's interesting is because he's got a little bit of that Konami code to his game. And the Rutgers situation, similar to Maryland, has just been very difficult all year with COVID and things like that. They've really gotten some clunky games, some games where they haven't had all their players, but they have put in 6 games. They're 1-5 after beating Michigan State in the first game. And Vedral has thrown for 300 yards 1 time. He has thrown sub 200 yards 4 times. He will give you a little on the ground, like 20 yards, maybe 20, 30 yards. Yeah, I mean, I originally was kind of like, ooh, 5,400 is interesting because he's a little bit odd, that Konami code, but yeah, that's pretty tough. 5,400. Gosh, I don't know. He's probably not quite enough. And Maryland's pass defense is fair, not great, but not terrible. I don't think Maryland's a complete pushover. They're kind of middle of the road in their pass defense. They're much better to run against. So I think I'd rather attack them there if I was going to play a Rutgers player, unless the value was just extreme. And 5,400 is pretty darn low for a quarterback, but sometimes those guys still don't hit value, even if they're that cheap. Finally, I'll mention Thorne for Michigan State. They play Penn State, who is kind of a low-ish defense on the slate in terms of allowing a lot of points. Their volume is pretty low, only 29 pass attempts allowed. I'm not too interested in this, but their normal starter Lombardi is likely going to not play. So if Thorne gets the start at 4,800, that value is darn good. But, Harrison Bailey last week was 4,500 against a fairly exploitable Florida defense, and it didn't produce what you need. So just because it's 4,800 does not mean he's going to give you the numbers you need. I mean, even 4,800 needs to come out with 16, 17 points. You probably at that point might be better off playing a receiver in the 46, 4,400 range and hoping for a touchdown and getting to the 16 to 18 points. I'm not really sure that's something we want to do. I wanted to bring it up just because it could be a starting quarterback at 4,800. I mean, that's worth, at least thinking about, but the matchup's probably not right against Penn State. On to running backs. So, to review the quarterbacks, I mean, I like, you can't argue with Mac Jones. You can't argue with Cunningham. Grayson McCall is interesting as a middle of the road. Really like Clayton Tune because you're getting that additional savings. Really like Tagovailoa. And then all the way, Sam Hartman's interesting. Jordan Travis, I guess, maybe against Duke. I mean, that's the only reason it's against Duke. Beginning with Najee Harris, running back, $9,200, most expensive running back on the slate, and I think just totally worth it. I mean, there are no other running backs that see his volume. He's looking at about 18 carries on average. He's looking at about 3 receptions on average, 21 touches. Even in blowouts, he's still seeing that type of volume. He's a very good bet for 2 touchdowns. Even in the blowout, he'll get 2 before they sit him. There's not a lot of other running backs that, I feel great about. I know the premium is there for 9,200, but we've been playing $10,000 running backs. We've been playing, $9,700 running backs. 9,200 really isn't that bad, even though it's the most expensive on the slate. It's just, a team who's favored by a ton of points, gonna score a ton of points. Like, yeah, it could all be Mac Jones, but I mean, Harris has been getting in the end zone. I mean, he hasn't been really shut out at all. I mean, Bama, it's just, could you play Mac Jones, Harrison Smith? Probably not. You'd have to find some people in the 3,000s across the board, but I mean, golly, it's just like they're going to put up so many points. I think I'm going to play Najee Harris a lot, because all these other running backs have so many questions. Like Harris has no questions. I mean, Arkansas is terrible, giving up, they're one of the worst defenses on the slate. In terms of points allowed, pass attempts allowed, plays allowed. I mean, teams are just running so many plays against them. The one thing you could say is their pass yards allowed per attempt is kind of middling for this slate. A little more efficient on the ground to give up those yards. So again, arrows pointing to Najee Harris. That's enough about him. I think he's a slam dunk, even at 9,200. I think even at 9,800, 10,000, you could argue that he's worth playing on this slate. Ramondre Stevenson's 8,700 for Oklahoma. He's backfield continues to be a little bit tough to predict, although he's definitely the lead dog, but they kind of split things up. He's not going to see much more than, what Harris is seeing, 18 and maybe 3 catches, unless it's some kind of spike week. They're projected for 35 points. But again, like we talked about Rattler, that West Virginia defense is not a pushover at all. They're one of the toughest defenses on the slate. Now, the Oklahoma offense is great, but I'd rather pay 500 more and get Najee Harris. CJ Marable for Coastal Carolina at 8,400. Really not a bad price tag for this guy. Little less on the ground. He's more like a 14 carry type guy, probably around 3 to 4 receptions. I think picking one between him and McCall might not be a bad idea against Troy. These guys are definitely going to count for, most of the touchdowns scored in this game. And, Marable's been amazing of late. He's been getting all into the end zone. I don't mind it. If I'm playing Harris, I don't know if I have the ability to play Marable too. But he's a good player. I like it. Troy defense is middling. You do get, but you don't even get tons of savings. You get 800. It's not like 1,200 or something like that. So again, I think of the top 3 running backs, I mean, Harris is just real tough to not just bite that bullet. You got Tyler Goodson for 7,500. Iowa against Wisconsin. I'm not going to have any players from that game. It's a slow, grind it game. Both teams are projected for about 20-ish points. No thanks. I mean, definitely not a running back from that game. Michael Carter for North Carolina is at 7,300. This is very, very interesting. We've got Michael Carter at 7,300, Javonte Williams at 7,000. Now, Javonte Williams is a guy a couple weeks ago was like 9,700, most expensive running back on the slate. He's now down at 7,000, coming off a game where he only had 3 carries. I don't know what to make of this. Even when he was running hot, the guy wasn't getting 25 carries a game. I mean, he was still splitting with Carter and getting, 18 carries, but just overwhelming touchdown equity. I mean, getting into the end zone 3-4 times a game on not limited touches, but not, 30. Anyway, we were talking about Michael Carter. I think either one of these guys is a little bit pricey for this Miami matchup that is, kind of a difficult one. I think I'd rather the passing game. Miami defense allowing only 36 total team rushes on the slate, 3.9 yards per carry is kind of that low middle section on the slate. They're just a pretty good defense. It's at Miami. I think if it's going to happen for North Carolina, it's going to need to be Howell and company through the air and or Michael Carter. He catches a lot, a little more than Javonte Williams. So, those are, it's a split backfield and it just is. I mean, they're almost 50-50. For a while, Williams was getting in the end zone a lot more than Carter, but Carter got in the end zone 3 times last week. I suppose in tournaments you say, well, I got to have one of them because one of them could have 3 touchdowns. That's not unreasonable, but it's a coin flip as to who that will be. So the UNC backfield, I think in kind of a conservative lineup when I'm trying to win cash games, triple ups and double ups, I don't think I want to take that risk. I'd rather just pay for a dude that I know is going to have all that TD equity in tournaments. Yeah, I mean you can make a case because they put up a lot of points. Letty Brown for 7,200. Now, this is a major volume play, 25 to 28 touches for him, almost lock and load for West Virginia. But the matchup is not very good for the Mountaineers against Oklahoma, who surprisingly is really tough against the run, only allowing 29 rush attempts per game. Second most on the slate, second least on the slate, and only 3 yards per carry. I mean, second least on the slate again. That is a bad matchup. If you're going to do anything on Oklahoma, try through the air. And Letty Bound catches passes, but that's just too stingy for a running back when there's some much better options. Larry Roundtree, Missouri against Georgia, forget that. Zamir White for Georgia, he's a trap. I mean, you need 2 touchdowns from the guy. He's probably not going to get you 100 yards because they split up that backfield so much. Could it happen? Yeah, he's gotten 100 yards once this season. Could he get in the end zone twice? Sure, but I don't know. It seems to me like an unnecessary risk because you can get 2 touchdowns from some of these other guys we're going to talk about. And it's not like he's a guarantee for 100 yards or anything like that. Even in weak matchups, they still rotate their running back. So no thanks for me. Cameron Harris, 6,700. Now, this is an interesting guy. He kind of could give you exactly what Zamir White does. For $100 less in a very nice matchup against UNC. They're probably comparable, actually. I mean, I guess it's only $100 savings. I kind of like Cameron Harris, but when I think about it, I guess him and Zamir White are probably similar. The nice thing is Harris is probably going to catch 2 passes, with White probably not. So that's 2 more little points there from a pass catching. You save $100. I'd much rather Cameron Harris. Then you have Beal Smith from Wake Forest in a absolutely wonderful matchup against Louisville. On the ground, that is where you want to, attack Louisville most of the time. He's 6,600. Again, these are all running backs. I think you can, pencil them in for 15 to 18 carries. Of the 3 in this group, only Cameron Harris can be counted on for 2 to 3 receptions. So if you're going to go in that range, I think Harris is the guy. He's got 2 touchdown upside, just like the others. Die for Oregon, 6,500. Kind of a middling price point, middling production. I don't love it. Mateo Durant for Duke. That's a split backfield between him and Deion Jackson. Durant's a little bit more of a big play guy, but the volume just isn't quite there for me to feel real comfortable, even though, man, FSU is a fantastic matchup. FSU is so bad. 5.2 yards per carry, second worst on the slate. Second worst yards per pass attempt on the slate, or no, worst yards per pass attempt on the slate. FSU, most yards per play on the slate. I mean, holy smokes, that defense is bad. I'm going to have to figure out a way to get some Duke players in my roster, but I don't know who to play. I mean, we didn't even talk about him. And Bryce, the quarterback's 5,500. That is so cheap, but he's like very liable for like a 12-point outing. Where are the points going to come from Duke? Durant's 6,400, but that's not cheap enough for a guy who's going to, top out at 15 carries probably because he splits the time. I don't know. Maybe we'll see some receivers. I mean, I have some on my list we'll talk about for just dirt cheap. Maybe that's where you go. Because, Durant, if he was, 4,900, 5,100, I think it's much more easy to stomach. 6,400. Traylon Smith for 6,300 for Arkansas against Bama. No thanks. Jalen Mitchell for Louisville, 6,200. Now that Javian Hawkins is out, they're kind of splitting that between Mitchell and I think Hassan Hall. no one's getting lion's share. Again, not really interested in these price points where, I'd rather play for like Cameron Harris or Beal Smith, where you're pretty confident they have the majority of the backfield touches, 15 to 18 carries they're going to get, rather than you start going down and these guys, they could get less carries. I mean, they could get 13, they could get 12, no passing game work. And then Traylon Smith, I'd be fine with, except for it's against the Bama front. I'd much rather attack Bama through the air. And then we have a potential, pretty big value to me, which is Kyle Porter for Houston at 5,900. If he's good to go against Memphis, I really like that. We already liked the quarterback. We like this offense in general. This is a guy that, when healthy, he has been seeing a couple receptions. You push 20 touches, 20 carries. I mean, I think he's a guy, 15, certainly to 20 touches is in play if he's good to go. Even at a nice game against brutal Cincinnati, 16 for 69 and a touchdown, 2 receptions. And he's coming in at 5,900. I really like that. Now he's listed as questionable on DraftKings. So we certainly have to look out for that and keep an eye out. That'll be, a Saturday morning thing, unfortunately, where we're going to have to figure it out. Last game against South Florida, when they did not have Kyle Porter, they really just split 8, 8, and 8, with 3 running backs, and Tune did most of the damage, 10 for 120 and 2. So I think if Porter's out, I think it's even more all systems go on Tune. If Porter is in, still like Tune. But then I think Porter becomes a real viable play at 5,900. Keep an eye out for that. CJ Verdell has really a strange season. He's kind of lost whatever he had going on in that backfield. 5,800. I don't really want a guy like that. You have no idea. He could get 5 touches. Deshaun Corbin for FSU. We've talked about the Duke side on offense, but Duke's defense is also pretty bad. Interestingly enough, not quite as bad as FSU. Real bad on the ground, 42 rush attempts allowed, 4.8 yards per carry. I think that's not a bad idea for Corbin. Webb has opted out. Their other kind of main running back, so we don't really know exactly. FSU hasn't played a game in almost a month now. COVID issues and things like that. 5,500, yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're probably going to split the backfield up. Travis is their quarterback. He runs a lot, which takes away from the ability for Corbin to run a lot. For 5,500, though, against Duke, it's certainly something to think about. Again, probably like Kyle Porter if he's in, but one thing could be pencil in Kyle Porter and then flip to Corbin in the event that Porter is announced he's out. Berger is 5,400 for Wisconsin. I don't want it against Iowa. McGrew for Washington is probably their best running back. He had 2 touchdowns last week. They're splitting up the carries so much in Washington. And the Oregon defense is kind of susceptible to the run. So this is a little bit interesting. He's 5,300. I think it was like 4,100 last year when he went for 2 touchdowns. So price jumped. That backfield's still pretty split. I mean, I think McGrew's been the best one, but I don't know. I think it's a very big coin flip. And unless we've, if anyone in the comments or something has an inside beat on what Washington's planning to do. But, when we had Ray on last week, he had no idea what was going on in the Washington backfield either. I think it's really tough. I wanted to play somebody from that backfield last week because the matchup was just beautiful. I ended up not because I just had no idea who it should be. McGrew's probably the one, but I think any given week it can change. Let's see. Kevon Lee for Penn State. Now they've got 2 guys, Lee and Devin Ford, 4,900. Kevon Lee's 5,100. This is a pretty good spot for Penn State. They're 14-point favorites. The Michigan State defense is pretty bad. They're, real bad on the ground, allowing 40 carries and 4.1 yards per attempt. They're just not a good defense, kind of in general. And Penn State should control the game. Penn State should run the ball pretty good amount. They like to run with a quarterback. And then Kevon Lee has been their best running back. But when Devin Ford plays, he does get, some carries. Lee's got a Q tag right now. So keep a lookout for that. I mean, if Lee is out, Devin Ford becomes very good play at 4,900. So Saturday morning, if Lee's out, we're going to be pivoting to Devin Ford a lot, I think, at that price point. Then we have Asa Martin for Memphis. Their Chris Rodriguez, I believe, is their number one running back. He's dinged up. He might play. Probably not too interested in him, if he plays, because he's a lot more expensive. But Martin is only 4,800. So this could open up a ton of value. And Memphis, the Houston is pretty liable on the ground. I actually like that a lot. Should Rodriguez be officially out, Asa Martin. So we've got some guys we are going to need to be watching on Saturday morning. Kyle Porter, Devin Ford, Asa Martin. And then at 4,500 is the, trash play of the week, Isaiah Pacheco, Rutgers running back. This has been a backfield that was kind of his for a while. I mean, he was getting 2 or 3, 4, 5, even 5 receptions in one game. He was getting 15 to 18 carries for the first 3 or 4 games. And then I'm telling you, that team has just had a weird middle of the season, partially COVID related and things like that. And so they've just been doing some weird things in the backfield. One game, they benched their starting quarterback, brought in a guy who can pretty much only run the ball, ran like option, and he just had like 20 carries or something like that. And Pacheco got almost nothing. But if they're running their typical offense, Pacheco is their guy. And against the Maryland run defense, I'm interested. Well, Maryland's pass defense is kind of good. Their run defense has just been giving it up. I mean, 46 rush attempts per game, most on the slate by a good margin, and 4.9 rush yards per attempt. So Maryland definitely can be exploited on the ground. I read a little write-up for some Rutgers blog. They agreed, that if you're going to attack Maryland, it's on the ground. So Pacheco's interesting. I mean, 4,500 is just nothing for a guy who could challenge for 15 touches in a good matchup. The value is there as a punt play, as a flex play, 4,500. You're going to need it. Just keep that name in mind. I mean, if we don't get some of these other values like Ford, Martin, even Kyle Porter, now he's much more expensive at 5,900, but if we don't get some of these $4,000 guys open up on Saturday morning, we can always pivot to Pacheco at 4,500. I don't hate it. I kind of hate Rutgers in that offense, but we'll talk about some of their pass game just because it's against Maryland. That game should be a little bit open, at least for garbage time. Even Pacheco can catch some passes. So I don't hate him as a running back. Now going into the wide receivers. Okay, Devonta Smith. I'm going to fade you again. $10,000. I can't do it. He is $2,100 more than the wide receiver 2 this week. Are you kidding me? He's awesome. He's awesome. I mean, what are you going to do? Twitter was blowing up. He had 3 touchdowns again. He's going to be maybe the first receiver off the board in the NFL draft now. He's awesome, but I just can't do it. I mean, I can't pay $10,000 when I feel like I have to play Najee Harris. I mean, one thing I might do is in some, tournaments, try to cram all the Bama players in to one and then just like total dumpster dive everywhere else. Of course, you got to have some with Devonta Smith. I mean, last week I had 0. The week before, I think I had 0. But, Mac Jones obviously loves him. There is no Jalen Waddle. I mean, he's just the guy, and it's crazy. Bama might be trying to get him to the all-time NCAA receiving yards record. That is in play for him. He's going to have to ball out, but, that's probably going to happen. You're going to have some, but I know 10,000 is just obscene. That's obscene. I mean, last week the most expensive receiver is 8,800. That was Garrett Wilson. So we're 1,200 more than last week's most expensive receiver. It's a lot. I mean, it's really tough. All right. I probably won't have a ton of Devonta Smith. I think, if you're rolling out a bunch of tournaments, you can't fade him. I mean, I did it last week and I hated myself. I should have played some Smith. I think if you're going to do a bunch of tournament lineups, you can't not try because he's liable for 40 to 50 points. Austin for Memphis is 7,900. He is their leading receiver, but I think there's some better value in the Memphis passing game. I like the matchup. That's great. No problem there. Stevenson for Houston. He's their leading receiver. He's got a questionable tag. If he plays 7,500, I'm intrigued. I'm having trouble getting to some of these higher priced guys, kind of in my optimal lineup, not necessarily, a Devonta Smith tournament lineup, but when I'm really trying to squeeze out value at every single position, it's harder for me to get to these more expensive receivers. And Stevenson is tough for me to pay up for. Harley for Miami. The volume's not there really for me for a guy who's 7,200. I mean, he caught 2 passes last week for almost 100 yards, which is great, but a guy who can catch 2 passes in the game, I'm not paying $7,200 for that. Although the UNC matchup is pretty nice. We're going to talk about a Miami player later that I like better for almost half that price. Bo Melton for Rutgers at $7,000. He's been their best receiver all year. Probably can bank on 5 reception floor for him. But there are some other receivers for Rutgers for way less that, could outproduce him on any given week. So that price, I mean, for him to be so much more than everyone else seems a little bit weird. So we're out on Melton. Jakari Roberson for Wake Forest. He has come through for us a couple of times. He's a nice player, 6,700 in a good matchup against Louisville, except for we talked about with Sam Hartman. They really do limit, the pass volume when you play against Louisville, which is concerning for a receiver, concerning for a quarterback. I think, for instance, the next guy, Dyami Brown, 6,600. I want Dyami Brown for 6,600 than Roberson for 6,700. I mean, there's no question. 10 out of 10 times. Brown has 152 touchdown upside in the matchup against Miami. I think Dyami Brown is a great play at 6,600. Probably will have quite a bit of him. Then we got Jahan Dotson for 6,500 in this Penn State matchup against Michigan State. Yeah, I mean, again, Michigan State's defense just kind of bad across the board. I don't have a problem. Dotson's definitely their number one receiver, but they have a freshman who's kind of coming on. He's so much less. I think I'd pivot to him because Dotson's floor and the other guy's floor is probably pretty similar, and their ceilings are similar, even though Dotson might be more consistent overall. George Pickens for 6,400 against Missouri. No thanks. He's a fine player that's a little bit too expensive for that game and that likely game flow. Daz Newsome for 6,300. I'd just pay up for 66 for Dyami. Let's see. Tutu Atwell, 6,200. He has opted out. Dante Demas for Maryland, 6,100 is intriguing. We've talked about Lil Tua and the matchup. Obviously, you want to correlate that with some pass catchers, and Demas at 6,100 is pretty nice. He's their leading receiver, but you could also get Jarrett for almost $1,000 less. Raheem Jarrett's 5,300. He is their hot shot freshman. Now, both players are pretty good, and Demas, I think, is still their number one receiver. Last time we saw Maryland out there and Jarrett was on the field, he went absolutely ballistic. 5, 144, and 2. The week before that, and against Minnesota, he was 6 for 68. So he was definitely coming on the last time we saw him. And he still has a questionable tag. So certainly got to just be on the lookout for what's going on with him. Demas becomes more of a play at 6,100 if Jarrett's out. If Jarrett's playing, I'm playing Jarrett for 5,300. Treylon Burks. Now, this guy is awesome. Awesome. The Dynasty and Devi community has really seen his stock go crazy this year. Toot toot on my own horn. I loved him in summer. I had really isolated him out, with what he did as a freshman. His size, he returns punts. He was getting, end arounds, jet sweeps as a true freshman on terrible offense. He accounted for the most receiving yards on the team, even though he did not get into the end zone. So I think he was kind of, low on some people's radars for that reason. But, he basically dominated the receiver room at Arkansas as a true freshman. He's ginormous, like 6'3" or 4", 225, 30 pounds. Guy returns punts. At that size, he is a freak, and he is freaking out this year. He has been phenomenal. He is their absolute alpha. Felipe Franks has really unlocked him. He is tracking to be, a pretty considerably high draft pick. If he does this again, I mean, you could be talking about first round. I think second round draft pick is way in play for him. He's just an elite talent. I mean, I really think that. I think we were talking on Twitter recently, these receivers who come in like DK Metcalf and, Chase Claypool, who are 6'3", 4, 5, and then, 225, 230 pounds, run a 4.4. I think Burks could be in that club when it's all said and done. So we'll have to wait and see. I think he's awesome. He's only 6,000. Yes, it's against Bama, but Bama is exploitable through the air, folks. They're not the defense they have been in the past. They allow one of the most passing attempts per game on the slate, probably because teams are, they're having to throw. Teams can't run the ball on Bama. They can't control the game against that offense on Bama. They have to throw. They have to play catch up. So if you're saying Treylon Burks is going to get a ton of targets, I mean, this is the kind of guy that can go 99 yards on any given play. I don't care what the defense is. At $6,000, he just had like 10 catches last game. I mean, the volume is there for him. The playmaking ability is there for him. He could get loose for a touchdown or two against Bama. I mean, Bama's defense is certainly not bad, but it is not a complete lights out defense, in my opinion. 6,000. It's not, I wouldn't say it's cheap, but when you can have 6,600 for Brown and 6,000 for Burks as your top two receivers, I really like that. Your upside, I mean, the thing with Burks is upside is 150 and 2 touchdowns. Like, that's just for $6,000. I mean, that's great. There's not a lot of other guys in this area you can say that about. You've got Theo Weiss. No, I mean, he's going to catch 4 or 5 passes for Oklahoma. Cade Otton for Washington, probably not, that level of a ceiling. Des Fitzpatrick for Louisville, probably not that type of ceiling. I mean, these are all guys in that general price range. Demas for Maryland, Hiley for Coastal Carolina. These are all guys in that 6,000 range. Burks has absolutely the highest ceiling of those guys. So yeah, I like him. I like him quite a bit. We talked about some of these other players. I don't love them at their price points. Then we have Devon Williams, 5,700. This is Oregon's receiver. He transferred from Southern Cal. And was really coming on back-to-back 100-yard games, 4 or 5 receptions, touchdowns coming in for him, and then he got injured. So he's on the injury watch list this week against Washington, who's a pretty good defense. The Washington defense is certainly not one to really exploit. That's why I don't like Tyler Show. But for Williams at 5,700, this is a guy that can challenge over 100 yards. And a score that is certainly worth thinking about, maybe as a pivot off De'Ami Brown, maybe I think I'd rather have Burks than Brown if I had to choose. Man, I really like Brown too. I mean, I like them all. but you're saving some money there, and you can put him in if he's good to go. It's a 3:30 game, so we probably won't know in the morning, which might make it difficult. So ear to the ground on that one. Sean Dykes for Memphis, 5,700. The floor is kind of too low for him. Jermaine Burton for Georgia, 5,600. I just think Georgia against Missouri, I mean, they're going to control the game and walk out of there, winning 28, 27 to, 3 or something like that. Missouri's not going to be able to score on them. 5,600. I just, I'd probably want a guy like Burton, who's not the top target on his own team, and could pop off, but I'd rather pay in the fours for him. And we'll talk about some guys in the fours that are, I think, a similar type situation, second receiver on the team in a good matchup, and could pop off, but you're not paying 56 or paying less for that potential. John Mechie, 5,500 for Bama. Now that is something you could do if you wanted to cram in Mac Jones, Najee Harris, and then go with Mechie instead of going with Devonta Smith as a 3-man Bama stack. I wouldn't have a problem with that. It's still a guy, 4 or 5 receptions. You're hoping for a touchdown. Smith is just so far and away the lead dog there. Taj Washington for Memphis. He's 5,100. Now, this is what I'm talking about with this is a guy who's a lot less, than Mechie. He's $400 less than Mechie. He's, $500 less than Burton. He's $700 less than Des Fitzpatrick for Louisville, even though Atwell is out. I still don't think you can guarantee yourself a whole lot. He's $700 less than Cade Otton. But, his reasonable projection against this Houston team in a game that probably shoots out is, 5, 6, 7 receptions for, 70 to potentially pushing 100 yards. And then, of course, you're hoping for a touchdown. But, that's what you're looking for, where you can save this money and get a guy with a similar ceiling. And that's Taj Washington for Memphis. He is kind of their second in command behind Austin. I know there's also this Dykes kid. But I think Washington has a nice upside. I wouldn't mind playing him at 5,100. Then we've got Wiggins for Miami. He's 4,600. But I'd rather go even lower to Mark Pope at 4,000. This is a guy who scored back-to-back touchdowns. He's the third on the team in receptions. He is third on the team in yards. He only has 2 touchdowns, but kind of one of their more, consistent producers this season. Last 4 games, 5, 3, 6, 4 receptions. He has no games in here where he only had 1 or 2. Between 50 and 100 yards, back-to-back games with a touchdown. So, I think compared, for instance, the most expensive player, Harley, 7,200, he only had 2 catches last week. Yes, they were for 90-something yards, but, we do chase volume, especially in PPR. 4 for 58 is 9.8 points. 2 for 90 is 11 points. I'd rather take the 9 points for $4,000 less or $3,000 less than 11 points. I like the matchup. I do think Miami's going to need to score. So yeah, Mark Pope for $4,000 is actually pretty nice. I mean, that's getting low into viable options, and I think he's a live player for Miami. I mean, he's a consistent part of their offense. It's a good matchup. Really kind of think that's a nice play. We talked about Duke versus FSU. FSU's defense is just awful, and I don't know who to play from Duke, and maybe it's Jalen Calhoun, who comes in at only 3,800. There's just no inspiring options on this Duke offense, to be honest with you. But when you're getting down into this level of price range, you can stomach these players in a matchup against FSU, I think. You've got Jalen Calhoun at 3,800. He is their leading receiver. 34 receptions, 320 yards, 2 touchdowns on the season. I think you can, you could reasonably expect, 4 catches. maybe a touchdown. Obviously, there's just nobody averaging very much per reception. They're all right around 10 yards. This is a check down Charlie offense. So that's, disappointing. In a game against FSU, yeah, of course you're hoping for a touchdown. But let's say 4 for 40 and a touch. That is 16. No, that's 14 points at 3,800. Now we're about 4x. So I really think it just takes a touchdown. Because I think this guy and Bobo, who's another receiver, their second leading receiver at 3,500. So he's even less. But I think like 4 for 40, 4 for 50, if you get lucky, one of them may go 5 for 60, 5 for 75. Now we're cooking, and you get one touchdown. So you just need that one. I think throwing one of these guys in there and against an absolutely atrocious FSU defense is not a bad idea. At this number, this is such a bad defense. You're kind of crossing your fingers, but if you do a bunch of tournaments, a Calhoun or a Bobo in there, you could get to 18 points at 3,500. That's huge. That is absolutely huge for your lineup. That's 5-6x value there. And I think that's in play. What would it take if they get a touchdown to get to 18 points? You need 12 more. So you're talking 5 for 70. 5 for 70 in a touch gets you 6x for a guy like Bobo, and I don't think that's out of the question. He's done it once before this year. It's not impossible for that to happen in this matchup against FSU. So don't forget about the Duke Blue Devils. I think if you're going to do it, do some of these extremely inexpensive receivers. Calhoun or Bobo would be my super cheap guy, except for Rutgers. We have not talked about Rutgers yet. I think it's a decent game situation against Maryland. I do like them on the ground. I like Pacheco. Rutgers has had a weird last few games. I think what happened was their starter was out with an undisclosed whatever. Their guy that they started that game, Sitkowski, I think is his name, got benched, I think, at halftime after having a decent first half. They bring in this other guy who ran the ball all second half, like 20 carries in the second half alone, who's like their third string quarterback. So the passing game kind of went completely belly up in that game against Purdue. And then they played Penn State last week in terrible weather. And that game was a disaster for Rutgers. They just looked horrible. However, there are two receivers on this team that were kind of rolling along before these last two weirdo games happened. So presumably they have Vedral back, their starting quarterback. And some of these guys are interesting at these price points. We have Aaron Cruikshank at 3,700. This is a guy that had 7 catches, and 8 catches in a 3-game stretch before Vedral got injured and before the horrible Penn State weather game. 7, 7, and 8 receptions for 3,700. You're almost getting 2x on receptions alone, not even yards. That is very interesting to me. He's a transfer from Wisconsin. He's very, very fast. He has scored on punt returns. He has scored on rushing, end arounds, jet sweeps again when he was at Wisconsin. And he was operating as a pretty important part of the Rutgers passing game, like I said, for a 3-game stretch there, 7, 7, and 8 receptions. That is nothing to sneeze at. And then since then, only 1 reception in that weird Purdue game and only 1 reception against Penn State. And you have Shameen Jones, who is 3,400. Now, this is about as low as we can possibly go. And I'm not jazzed about Shameen Jones. I've never heard of him before tonight. But against Michigan and Purdue, even in that weird Purdue game in the first half, he had 8 for 88 and 2 touchdowns, I think all in the first half, or most of that came in the first half. He also had 7 for 127 against Michigan. So 2 of the last 3 games back-to-back, he had 7 receptions and 8 receptions. And then we have that weird weather Penn State game. He only went 1 for 10, but no one really did much in that game. Everything was just a disaster. These are guys who are literally scraping the bottom of the barrel in price range. Rutgers should get their starting quarterback back for this game, and he was able to kind of support some of these receivers. So major punt plays, Cruikshank and Shamin Jones from Rutgers, recent history of 7 to 8 catches in games, more than once. That's crazy to even get a price point there for a guy who could catch 7 passes, and has done it even more than once. So very intriguing guys there at absolutely rock bottom prices. I think you could put a team together, with the Bama stack, go all the way across the board with the most expensive player at each of the 3 positions. And then you go 3 of these $3,000 receivers. I haven't even tried this yet. Let's just try this. This is wild. I can't imagine you could really even put together all 3 Bama players, but we're having fun here. So let's just do this live, and then we'll send you on your merry way. We're going to go Mac Jones. We're going to go Najee Harris. We're going to go Devonta Smith. Boom, boom, boom. Your average for the rest of your players are still 4,200. So this is going to get interesting. If we go super cheap, these $3,000 receivers, let's go Calhoun, 3,800. Let's go Cruikshank, sure, for 37. And maybe instead of Calhoun, let's go Bobo. He has a little bit better yards per reception, so maybe we get a little juice there. Let's go Pacheco. And we still got a flex. We can go low. Let's double down with Shamin Jones. Sure, why not? Let's do 2 Rutgers. Guys, we can get a super flex of Demas for Maryland. A super flex QB of Graham Mertz. I don't really want to do that. But you could get Vedral for Rutgers. You could just do a full-blown Rutgers stack, which is, maybe that is an interesting idea. If it goes off, no one's going to have this. At least I don't think. You could put Treylon Burks in your flex. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, this is a guy who, can score on the level of some of these lower quarterbacks. I mean, 41 points last week, 20, 20, 33, 38. I mean, I know it's not a quarterback in the super flex, but like Burks has that ceiling, and you're running it back with the Bama stack. I mean, boom, let's do that. Man, you could get the full Bama stack, run it back with Treylon Burks, and get some receivers who, granted, are not anything special, but get some receivers that, can challenge for 7 receptions, have done it before this year. I'm going to do one. Well, there you go, folks. It's been fun. We're going to sign off. That is the week 15 we are now. Slate breakdown. We even put together a fun little wild tournament, stars and scrubs lineups for you. Bowl season is coming. We are preparing for that. You've got day games. You're going to want to be paying attention to the bowl games with some lineups on the line during your work day, for those mid-December bowl games. You're going to want to do it when you're got to hang out with your in-laws and put the game on, and you want to be tilting during the family meals, okay? That's what we want to do. So, be logged on here for all the bowl coverage we're going to have for you. I hope you like what you hear. I hope you hit subscribe, let's get some comments going. Please follow me on Twitter as well for stuff that's just coming off of my head in the middle of the week. That's certainly some different type of information and stuff you can get. We get good conversation over there. People are asking about their lineups. I try to respond. I'm going to be out there. I'm grinding this slate just like you are, and hit me up over there. So that is AL_FF_RED. And why wait till Sunday? We could do this all week long. I will see you for the recap. Hopefully it will be a successful one.